obviously you've been doing art since you were a little child, but along the way you also had education around craftsmanship and engineering and all that sort of thing. Can you talk about how that feeds in and how your academic training and your craftsmanship have intersected now?
Yeah, I think for me, doing artwork and then graduating from high school and trying to figure out what do you really want to do as an occupation, and I was sort of on track to being in line with something in the arts, and my high school counselor kind of dissuaded me from that, saying that economically that's not a very prudent choice. So, and in a general sense, he's right, but I think that hiatus of following what my counselor had said led me into doing a very sort of a trade-oriented field of engineering where I studied non-destructive testing, and it was just the testing of structures. There was a very noted school that was near where I grew up in Minnesota, and my brother had gone through the program, and he was doing quite well financially, and so I decided to do that, and I got a break working for First Northrop Corporation as a technician in a research and development lab on the B-2 bomber project, and then I transferred after a couple of years over to McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, and I worked at McDonnell Douglas for a few years. And I think that seeing that world, which was interesting and fascinating in some regards, but it wasn't my forte, and I wasn't doing artwork per se. It was creative, like most things. They're problem solving. Everything is sort of problem solving in some way. And so I think that experience of being in that world, it allowed my left brain to grow or have a little bit of access to analytical thought. And so when I quit that and went back to art school at Art Center College of Design, it was almost like my right brain at that time had atrophied, and I had to kick that back in again to bring me back to the creative side. But I think in what I do now, working with pieces that have to be engineered or have to be structurally safe or structurally interesting, I think the engineering works hand in hand with that pretty well. I'm glad I had that experience now, and I think it makes my work unique, or my approach to it unique, and that I can work with city entities or work with people that are in the engineering world. When I did a bridge for the city of Albuquerque, I was working with structural engineers, and they had call-outs for certain requirements of where the impact zone of a vehicle would be at a bumper height of 18 inches, and my design would have been flawed in that. And so seeing that, I had compassion for that and understood that that was part of the design, that of course that has to be that way, and I redesigned it with that in mind. And they hadn't had that relationship with an artist before that was fairly unique, and I think that sort of thing is attributed directly to my experience in engineering.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about, tell me about your experience at art school. Was that a happy home and a place where you really flourished?
Yeah, I mean, I loved having some academic training, especially with the foundation courses that were happening. It was all eye-opening for me to actually give me some structure to what I was doing, and that I think I was self-taught in a lot of ways up to that point. High school teacher was, an exception. He actually was more involved and understood color and that sort of thing. But being in a more academic sense, I think was, in one way it was flourishing, in another way it was sort of, I love the camaraderie, and I love the access that I had to different people that were coming in and giving lectures and all of that. It's a great place for that. And the fine arts program at Art Center, at that time, it was pretty wide open and hard to really pin down what was going on at that time. I wanted to learn how to paint in a certain way, and the school was a little bit, in some ways, unable to teach me that. I wanted to understand how Innes and Turner and Hudson Bay painters and that sort of thing, how they handle paint.
Mm-hmm.
and nobody was teaching that. It was more splashy, and so I learned a lot of things about figurative drawing, and Vernon Wilson, and there's quite a few people there that had that and could give me that. But in some sense, I wasn't getting what I wanted to learn at the time.
Mm.
So, yeah.
And then how did you make the transition? Did you immediately then go out and become a quote professional artist, or how did that transition go?
No, well, at the time I started going to art school while I was still working in engineering in the evenings, and then I transitioned to full time after maybe 6 months or so. And so when I was through with Art Center, then I was married at the time, and my wife and I decided that we were just going to sell everything and hit the road. So we packed up all of our belongings and sold the house, sold the extra car. Everything that wouldn't fit into a Jeep CJ7 was gotten rid of, and we hit the road, and I just painted landscapes for a year and traveled through practically every state. And that was a great kind of finding a voice, or finding what was interesting to me as far as painting. I hadn't done sculpture at all before that point. And then ended up settling in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, needed to get a job, and so I got a job working in a foundry, and that was my first exposure to doing sculpture.
Hmm.
I was working in the mold department and waxworking and some chasing or metal work, and for a while I was doing bronze pouring, and so I had kind of a well-rounded understanding of what a foundry was about, and started working in the evenings doing my own work. And the foundry, Weston Foundry in Santa Fe, New Mexico, was really great with giving me the opportunity to do work. Anyone who worked there could pour a cup a month, and so there was no charge for it. You could, as long as you were encouraged to work on your own work, and that was really a great incentive and a great opportunity. So that was the beginning of sculpting, and that was 1990. And then it just led to me leaving the foundry and going into work for myself independently, and doing enlargements and mold making and stuff for other artists in the Santa Fe area, and outside the area I was doing some mobile stuff with different artists in different states. But that was, I'd say the beginning of my professional career was really 1990, 91.